Good morning to everyone. Welcome on this our last of this third EARMA Best Practice event parallel session organized by WG2, which deals with finance in EU funded projects. I missed to mention yesterday, but if you are not a part of WG2 mailing list and wish to be part of our community and share your experience, doubts, questions, or answers, with us, please send to me your email address as direct message in the chat. Please be aware that if left unanswered the question today, we will send them to whole WG2 mailing list after this event. Now, please pay attention on house rules on the screen. As a brief reminder of all of you from yesterday, I will not spend time to reread all of them here, but don't forget to use the chat function for asking questions, share information or comments during all our sessions. We will collect all your questions and give our best to provide answer during the meeting. If you will, of course, have a room for live discussion, you always can raise your hand, but note that the live discussion is planned for the very end of each session. Today, we will continue with two important topics about novelty in Horizon Europe. We go forward in details about unit costs and lump sum. These two topics will be presented by Inge Andresen. He is a senior advisor in financial and project management of European project at Norwegian University of Science and Technology. His experience compresses all EU framework programs since FP6, along with various other research programs. He has a master's degree in economics and business administration with specialization in project leadership and management, and bachelor degree in environmental and research studies and comparative development studies. He has more than 30 years of professional experience from research performing and the higher education institution. He has been actively involved in EARMA since 2008. He was an active participant in BESTPRAC cost action, which went on for an exceptional duration of 6 years from 2013. And remain engaged in follow-up activities in all European best practice network. Inge, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Marija, for your kind introduction. So let's hope that I hit the right screen now. Hello, everyone. Marija said I have two presentations.
I have to ask all participants to mute if you are not a speaker. Yeah, good. Inge presentation mode is great. Go ahead.
Thank you. As Marija mentioned, I have two presentations now, one on unit costs and one on lump sum funding. So I plan to spend perhaps a little bit less time on unit costs and more on lump sum funding. If that's okay with everyone. We'll see how many questions there are and so on. So for the unit costs, I just have to navigate my screen here. There are basically four issues or topics that I'm like to address. First is give you an overview of the unit costs, and then explain quite briefly and without going in too much into detail about how are the different categories of unit costs determined, and then how to calculate them. Just finish with a brief overview or where you can look for more information. So for the for Horizon Europe, first of all, what do they mean by unit cost? The definition of unit cost is that you have calculated or determined a fixed amount of euros in cost per unit of something. And what's something? It may be per time unit, per hour, per day, per month. So you may have for certain costs defined a fixed rate per, for instance, hour. It may also be per unit of service. Let's say for a lab, for using of a lab or using a scientific instrument, that may also, you may also have determined a fixed amount per unit of time for using a lab, or a fixed amount of per unit of time of using a scientific instrument. A third example of what is a unit is that in some cases you may have a fixed cost for a standardized service or for standardized goods that are provided internally within your own organization. So that is, what do we mean by unit? Just to clarify something, what's the difference between unit costs and a lump sum? The difference is that lump sum has to do with funding. And we have more on that in the next presentation. What are the applicable cost categories where you may have or only have unit costs in Horizon Europe? First of all, we have the average personnel costs. And in that case, they need to be calculated according to the usual accounting practice. I'll go quickly through this list. The second category is personnel costs for SME owners and natural person beneficiaries. And Martin talked about this in his talk earlier today, just briefly emphasizing that when we talk about SME owners, it's for SME owners who don't receive a salary from this SME. The third category where you may have unit costs and only have unit costs also is for internal invoice goods and services. Sarah had a very good presentation about that yesterday. I'll just briefly summarize a few highlights about that in a later slide now. The fourth category where you may have unit costs or you may also have actual costs is for research infrastructure actions, either transnational access to research infrastructure or virtual access to research infrastructure. Then the fifth category is Marija Skłodowska reactions. Actually, the Commission has changed the terminology from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe. They used to call it unit costs in Horizon 2020. Now they call it unit contributions. And in a way it fits better because it's actually more about how much funding you get per unit rather than what are your costs per unit. There is also a last category, which I won't go into in this presentation. For Euratom, the Euratom program, they have co-fund stability and mobility cost and unit cost for that. So how are they determined, these units? That depends on category. So in this table, you see that some are decided by the Commission. They have decided what is the unit cost. In the other categories, they have to be calculated by each beneficiary. So in this table, you see that there are three. In this table, you may see that there are three categories of these unit costs that are decided by the Commission. And that's the one for SME owners, natural person beneficiaries, the personnel costs for these categories of personnel, and also for the Marija Skłodowska reactions and the Euratom staff mobility costs. So you don't need to calculate anything about what the unit cost will be, with one minor exception for the MSCA that I'll get into. For the other four categories, each beneficiary has to calculate its own unit costs. The average personnel costs, according to usual account practice, the internal invoice goods and services, the transnational access cost, and the virtual access costs. So how do we calculate them? First of all, for those that are decided by the Commission, you have to go and find the relevant unit cost in the work program. But you do have to do one kind of calculation for the MSCA, the doctoral networks and the postdoctoral fellowships. You need to take into account the country correction coefficient for the living allowance. And for the unit cost for SME owners, you have to do the same thing for the SME owners and natural persons. you need to do the same thing, look at the country correction coefficient for the living lines, but also convert the monthly rate to a daily rate. For the unit cost that the beneficiary needs to calculate, basically you need to start with the accounts and then exclude ineligible items, and you may include budgeted or estimated elements. So how to calculate the average personnel costs? I'll go quickly through this, not spending too much time on details. And the last part of this slide is also being explained in a different calculation. It's already a different presentation. So also we might say something like that. Actually, so, but first of all, as was mentioned also by Martin today, for the organization's account, when you are going to calculate the average personnel cost, you start with the actual personnel cost for in the accounts for the reporting period. You exclude ineligible items and items that are included in other budget categories. You may include budgeted or estimated elements for this average personnel cost, which you don't for the individual or actual personnel cost, but here you may. But look at the criteria for doing that. And the daily rate, I won't spend time commenting on it. It's here and it's been discussed in other presentations, how to get to the daily rate. You don't need to have the same average personnel cost for everybody in your organization, so there are different varieties that you may have there. For the personnel cost for the SME owners and the natural person beneficiaries, it's stated in the documents that what is the rate per month. What I'm wondering is, will this change when you have new MSA work programs for later years? Because this rate is actually stated specifically, as far as I can remember, in the grant agreement. So I would expect an update on that for later work programs, like they did have in Horizon 2020 for the MSCA work program. You have to calculate a daily rate, starting with a monthly rate. And they've actually stated in the guidelines that you should divide by 18, which is roughly 215 divided by 12, but not exactly. So if you did, the exact calculation would end up with a slightly different number than what they say you should do, right, in the guidelines. And then you have to, as I said, take into account the country correction coefficient. And keep in mind that there is a ceiling. You cannot declare more than 215 days per year. Internal invoice goods and services. Sarah had a great presentation about this yesterday. This is a summary of how to proceed with the calculation. First of all, there's a requirement that this unit cost calculation needs to be based on the usual accounting practice and practice throughout, regardless of who is funding the user of this service or this good. And it needs to be based on objective criteria, this calculation. It can't be sort of a room for judgment on what kind of rate to charge. And also, so then basically, as I said before, you start with the organization's accounts. You remove ineligible items and those that are included in other budget categories, but also make sure that if you have used any resources that don't belong to your organization and you use them free of charge, you also need to leave those out of the cost calculation. You can, again, as for the average personnel cost, you include budgeted or estimated elements with the same criteria that I mentioned, that were mentioned on the other categories. If there are cost items that are to some extent used for the production of the service or good, but not entirely, you can only include the share of the cost item that's used for this production of the service or good. And also keep in mind that if you have an allocation key that as a result gives you a higher unit cost for EU funded project compared to other projects, that would not be accepted. Moving on, for transnational access and virtual access, I have not found any specific guidelines yet published by the Commission applicable to Horizon Europe. I could have included here some items from Horizon 2020, but I decided not to because perhaps something might come out differently when they publish something for Horizon Europe. Risk of those reactions, I'm sure a lot of you know this, are familiar with this, so I'll just summarize it here, how to approach it for the MSA Doppler networks and the MSA postdoctoral fellowships. For the living allowance, as I said, the correction official. I just noted here that they actually, as I said, changed the terminology, so now they call it unit contributions. And just look at the work program for the relevant year. This is where to look for clues and guidance. You have the annotated model grant agreement, you have the corporate model grant agreement, you have also, as Martin mentioned, the funding scheme specific model grant agreement, i.e. in this case, the model grant agreement for unit grants, which comes into play in this case. And of course, you have the online proposal. So that's it for unit costs. Any questions, comments?
I have one question because we had one in the chat and we get the answer. If we decided to use average personnel costs, should we ask for some kind of certificate from Commission, or just we should settle it in our internal procedure and start to use this opportunity for all our projects on institution, of course?
Yeah, actually, I didn't even check that. So you don't need a certification, as far as I remember. Okay. But you might try for one if you plan to use it, and if you plan to have a lot of projects, it might be a good idea to look into it. But it won't be required, as far as I know.
Oh, thank you very much. We don't have a further question about this. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go on to lump sum funding, everybody's favorite subject, right?
Yeah, we will see.
I'll share the window now.
Yes, please go in. Are you in presenter mode? Yes.
Yeah.
Good, great.
Do you see it?
Everything is fine, go ahead.
Okay. Great. So for lump sum funding, what I'd like to do is first talk about what do we mean by lump sum funding? Why has it come about? What are the categories or options of lump sum funding? What are some benefits and what are some risks of lump sum funding? A shift of focus that is caused by this funding scheme. The Commission has published an assessment of the pilot. Just a few words about that, but also a few words about what associations of research program performing organizations have stated about lump sum funding in recent statements that they have published. And what are the Commission's plans for the lump sum funding and what to look for next? So what's a lump sum? It's a fixed amount of funding for a completed activity. And in general, in the lump sum funding scheme that has been tested now in the pilot, and the Commission plans to expand in the years to come. The principle is that you get a fixed amount of funding per completed work package. There is a different model for the ERC POCs, the proof of concept, where there is a fixed amount for the project and it's predefined for the call, the 150,000 euros. So there's only that amount and it's fixed for everybody for each project. And it's important to understand that with lump sum funding, it doesn't, whether or not you will get the funding is not dependent on that you have the results that you expected and that you have successful outcome of the project. It's dependent on having done the job that you describe in the proposal and in Annex 1, basically. A few words about more financial aspects of this. First of all, cash flow is one thing. When is the money actually yours is a different thing. First, about cash flow. You do get a pre-financing just as for the other projects, and you do get interim payments. The difference is that for interim payments, you only get that for work packages that have been completed, and the Commission accepted that. So there is where the cash flow difference comes in for these projects versus others, is when you get to the interim payments. And for the last settlement, the payment of the balance, which is what the Commission calls it, the final payment would depend on also work packages having been completed and accepted as such. Although they say that it's possible that you may, for work packages that were only partially completed, a partial payment for that, but there is no guarantee that you'll get that. And then you have the release of the amount that were retained from the mutual insurance mechanism, but also Martin explained that's the new name for the participant guarantee fund. So cash flow is one thing. The other thing is, when is this money that you get actually your property as a beneficiary? As just a quick reminder, the pre-financing is just, it's still the property of the Commission. So it's only when the work packages have been completed within a reporting period, you submit a report, the Commission accepts that the work package, yes, it was completed as described. It's only then that the EU funding actually is the property of the beneficiary. So that's different from cash flow. Why lump sum funding? Just very quickly. First of all, the goal is to reduce the percentage of errors in financial reporting. The second is that the European Court of Auditors, which assesses how the Commission manages its budgets and carries out its activities, basically, they have made a clear recommendation of lump sum funding as together with other ways of simplification. And the third reason for launching this is a potential for simplification during the implementation stage of projects. So there are two options, two categories of lump sum funding. One is that the amount is fixed in the call for proposals. The other is that the project consortium proposes a lump sum based on a detailed estimation of cost. First of all, then you have to use and upload a detailed Excel file with a detailed breakdown per work package, per beneficiary, but also in the Excel file per cost category. And I've included a link to this Excel file, which is available in the EU portal. I include a couple of screenshots from it in the next couple of slides. So then consortium proposes a lump sum with a breakdown per beneficiary and per work package. During the evaluation stage, the amounts will be assessed. So it's not like they stressed when they started Horizon 2020 that there is going to be no negotiation about the budget. In this case, well, it won't be a negotiation, but the budget may change during the evaluation stage. And they will, as they say, use the advice of experts, but also they're working on what they call a personnel cost dashboard, which would be based on historical data of accepted personnel costs for previous projects. This is something they're working on now, and it will contain accepted costs per country and per type of organization. And that is part of the data that the Commission will use when they make up their own mind on whether this budget seems reasonable and fair or not. And then the lump sum amounts will be fixed during the grant preparation stage following that. This is one screenshot from this Excel file. This is the spreadsheet for each beneficiary. So you see you have some categories of personnel that they have sort of predefined, and you have to fit your personnel into those categories. And then you have the other categories in the budget table. And what you can see all the way through is that, okay, the only thing that you can input here is a number of units and a unit cost. I'll have another comment on that later on. And this is one of the other spreadsheets in the Excel file, which summarizes the budget calculation for the lump sum for each work package. So when you add beneficiaries, you would also see the Excel file being updated based on that. What are the benefits of lump sum funding? First of all, like I mentioned, the goal is to have a reduction of errors in financial reporting. Yes, by default, because you won't have any financial reporting of actual or unit cost. The financial statement will be generated automatically in the portal based on the lump sums in the grant agreement and whether or not the work package is considered completed or not within each reporting period. That's one benefit, no errors in financial statement. The other is there will be no financial audit. But there will be checks, reviews, and audits. So everybody needs to be aware of that, of project implementation and the compliance with the other obligations of the grant. There is a potential, I would say, for simplification during the project implementation stage, because the people participating in the project would then have a possibility to focus less on financial management in order to comply with EU requirements and focus more on the completion of project activities. But everyone should, at least those that are involved in financial follow-up internally, should keep in mind that you would normally still want to keep a track of how the project is performing financially in terms of cost versus lump sum for internal monitoring purposes. So that won't go away. Some risks of lump sum funding, which we'll follow in the next few slides. First is there is a reduced flexibility to change the budget during the implementation stage. The second is what I call a consortium risk. And the third is issues with the work package structure. For the reduced budget flexibility, first of all, it said strictly, straight out in the lump sum model grant agreement, Article 5.5, you can't have any budget transfers without an amendment of the grant agreement. In Horizon 2020, it said clearly, okay, it's okay with for the consortium to do shift things around in the budget without an amendment, as long as you do what's said in Annex 1. That's fine. Here, you cannot do that. You need an amendment if you want to have any budget transfers between beneficiaries or between work packages. The next thing is that you can only have budget transfers or budget relocations between work packages. And as I said, you need an amendment for that, only if those work packages have not been completed. And that concerns any of the work packages that you want to include in a budget shift. So that means, I would argue, that budget calculations at the proposal stage are much more critical, because you're so much more tied to that budget that you calculate when you implement the project. And the second is that the budget negotiations between beneficiaries at the proposal stage is much more critical. The Excel budget file, I showed you a couple of screenshots. It's quite detailed, but it still lacks flexibility in terms of calculating. If you have several cost items for, let's say, equipment or travel, you cannot just calculate all of those things in this Excel file, because you have to use your own Excel file to do the calculations and then summarize, okay, what does this mean for my budget for, let's say, travel in the Excel file that you need to provide to the Commission. So it's not like that their Excel file can replace your own. One other implication is that the financial knowledge and skills and staff capacity needs to be redirected from the implementation stage to the proposal stage. That's about budget flexibility. About consortium risk, there is a need to trust partners during the proposal stage for budget calculations and budget negotiations. I'm here focusing on financial issues. There are other issues as well, but this is primarily about financial aspects. There is a need to trust partners during project implementation. One underperforming partner is enough to threaten the approval of the entire work package for everyone who participates in that work package. So if one partner doesn't do its job, the others who are involved in the other partners who are involved in the same work package need to take over to complete the work package, or otherwise you risk having no EU funding for the entire work package for everyone who participates in the work package. So the question is then, do you end up collaborating only with your old friends, quote unquote, partners that you have collaborated with in the past and you know that they will deliver from your previous experience with them, perhaps partners that are recommended by contacts who you trust and you trust their judgment. A tendency or a risk towards that? Is there an increased obstacle for new partners that you don't know to join this proposal? And is there an increase possible for partners from countries with low participation to get more heavily involved in the framework program in Horizon Europe? Questions? Work package structure. There is an incentive because of the lump sum funding rules to adapt the work package structure, first of all, in terms of their duration, to keep them confined with one reporting period, so that when you get to the reporting period, you can say that, okay, this work package was completed. We can get, hopefully, the funding for that work package approved, and that's it. So that, as I mentioned, it improves your cash flow in terms of the interim payments, but it also reduces the financial uncertainty whether this funding would be approved or not, and then become your property. And the other is how many beneficiaries you involve in a work package. There is an incentive to have as few partners as possible in one work package, because that minimizes the risk in terms of everybody doing their job in the work package. So the ultimate risk minimizing cash flow, maximizing project structure, because this is the extreme, is one work package per partner per reporting period. You won't probably go that far, but there is the rules are providing incentive in that direction, you could argue. And that is, so that means that the rules provide an incentive to move towards a project structure which is not necessarily optimal from a project management point of view. And it's not necessarily minimizing the risk of regarding to the implementation of the project. There is a tendency towards more fragmentation of the project structure, less integration of the whole project, and less incentive for close collaboration when you're implementing the project, because you want to have as few partners involved in each work package as possible. At least there is an incentive to that, and also you break down work packages between periods. So, but though I'm not saying you would go all the way in that direction, but there is an incentive in there. So, and then the issue of shift of focus. Financial knowledge, skills, and staff capacity need to be redirected from the project implementation stage to the proposal stage. However, you still need to follow up financially with financial monitoring for internal purposes. Researchers and non-financial staff, in the proposal stage, there is probably a need for them to get more heavily involved in discussions about how the project plan affects the budget. And then in the implementation stage, they can focus less on financial issues. Marija, how are you doing on time?
We have just 5 minutes more, and we really need the time for question and answer.
Okay, so I'll go very quickly through the last part. The EU has, the Commission has published an assessment of the lump sum funding pilot. I've briefly quoted the main conclusions here, that it works in practice and is fit for the wider use, and they want to expand it. And you see the link there below, so you can have a look at the report yourself. There are some questions whether it's too early to draw these conclusions because these projects that are in the pilot haven't been completed, so you don't have the whole project life cycle. And there's also a question about how representative it is in terms of respondents, because there is a significantly higher percentage of SMEs among the respondents in this pilot than you had as participant in the previous framework program. I've just included here reference to statements made by Lira and by a joint statement by EUA, CSER, and IARTO, where they comment on this assessment. And they're stating that don't jump the gun, don't move as quickly. There's still more that we need to look at and things that we need to take care of if this is going to go well. I'm paraphrasing now. You can see the quotes here and you can read the reports itself. The Commission wants to expand the use of lump sum funding. They were going to have an amendment of this year's work program in April and may have a few lump sum calls there. And then plan to have more lump sum calls in the next years. So one thing is that we're missing in the DESPA consortium agreement template, we're missing anything about lump sum funding. It would be great to have there. I mentioned that. We should have more sharing of experience among RMAs on this. The Commission, I believe, has said for a couple of years, they plan to integrate Excel budget table in the portal. It isn't yet. And how about the personnel cost dashboard? Questions about that. And here's a link to clues and guidance, and now for the questions.
Thank you very much, because we have 2 minutes more only. First question. The institution can decide to use unit costs for personnel costs instead of declaring them with the normal way? Or do I only need unit costs to calculate my budget for the grant application? If yes, what is the advantage of unit costs for personnel costs compared to declaring the actual personnel costs?
I would say that the main difference is when you talk about unit cost for personnel, it means average personnel cost. In practice, that would mean that you have most typically the same cost for everybody, all your personnel in one category. So you might have a few, anywhere from 2 to 10 different categories of personnel in your organization, and then you calculate an average rate for each of those 10 categories of personnel. But you need to apply that consistently as your methodology of calculating personnel costs for projects within your organization. And if you included them in budget, you can only do that if this is how you would actually report the costs as well. Is that an answer?
I hope so. I have to go on a next question. When the organization is deciding to report personnel costs at the unit cost level, is COMIC no longer required in Horizon Europe?
Is what required?
I think that this is a certificate of some of the EU certificate.
Yeah,
which we have.
You still need, if you need a CFS, certificate on the financial statement.
Not CFS, it is something that's like certificate for, I don't know, average cost or something like that.
Okay, the certification on the methodology.
Methodology, yes, that's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I should have checked that. I'm sorry I didn't. I don't think you need a certification on the methodology for that.
Okay, we can reply.
Sure, I'm 90% sure. Sorry.
Okay, we can reply on mailing list. No budget reallocation. Does this also affect on budget reallocation of the budget categories within a work package? This is
this was for lump sum funding, I guess, right? Yeah. Well, the Article 5.5 in the lump sum grant agreement says you can have no budget shifts, no budget transfers. I think you could have between cost categories, but you cannot have between work packages, and you cannot have between beneficiaries, because it's about the lump sum, and the lump sum is defined per beneficiary and not per work package. The breakdown per personnel cost in itself that goes into the calculation of a lump sum, and I think it is the because you're being funded on a lump sum basis. It's the lump sum per work package and per beneficiary that cannot be changed without an amendment. Okay, we don't have time for all of this question, but nice presentation. Do you foresee an update of the consortium agreement in order to handle the mentioned risks? I think this. I hope that the desk group will work on this. They published the first version of the desk template for Horizon Europe, and they also said when they published it that there is nothing here for the lump sum funding, that they may be working on it, is I think what they said, and I hope they will. In other words, if not, I think we in our BESTPRAC network we could exchange ideas about how to take these things into account while we're waiting, hopefully, for the desk template to provide solutions on it. I hope so. And the last question for today, it seems to me that we do our MET homework really well at the application phase, and also that it goes against including the new partners from less research intensive countries, and also describe the collaboration in any given work package to reduce the risk. Is there a built-in mechanism to manage these disadvantages, or shall we just stay actual cost declaration? Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. Okay, I think, okay, I will repeat. It seems to me that we do our homework really well at the application phase, and also that it goes against including new partners from less research intensive countries, and also decrease the collaboration in any given work package to reduce the risk. Yeah. They're built in the mechanism to manage these disadvantages, or shall we just stay with actual cost declaration? Well, the thing about the consortium risk and the obstacle for partners from less countries with lower participation rates, that was a comment I meant for lump sum funding. And then you won't report actual cost, right? So in a way, I'm still not sure I understand the question, so it would be better if we could talk back and forth, but reporting actual cost is not an option if it's lump sum funding. Lump sum funding is lump sum funding, that's it. Of course, I mean, you could internally monitor how costs progressing, but in terms of whether it would affect your funding or not, it can only affect your funding if you have an amendment of the grant agreement. And the question is, how likely is it that you will have that? And would you have that for financial reasons because you see that the costs are progressing very differently from what you expected? Perhaps that would be one way of dealing with this risk. The question is, would all of the consortium members be on board and agree to then ask for an amendment on the budget or not? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Inge, for a great presentation and discussion. Now we are moving on to our last but not least session for today. Cost is one of the very important programs for researchers and for us RMIs. Because of that, we found valuable to hear about the international perspective on managing of the cost action.
Let me introduce our next speaker, Andri Charalambous, or just Andri, is a project officer of research and innovation support operations at the Climate and Atmosphere Research Center of the Cyprus Institute since 2019. She has 10 years experience in management of national, international, and EU-funded research projects. She's chair of a new BESTPRAC thematic group of EARMA. Previous, she was the vice chair and grant holder of our cost action BESTPRAC. And she also a member of the EARMA thematic group for ethics and research integrity of her network. Andri, floor is yours, and take on patient. We take your time. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Marija. Glad to be with Working Group 2. It's my first time, I think, that I am in Working Group 2 since I joined BESTPRAC. So today I'm going to try and share my experience as a grant holder of a cost action, and more specifically of BESTPRAC. So without further delay, I will move on to the next slide. Okay.
We see on your first, great.
Okay. Some few words about COST. COST is a funding organization for research and innovation networks. Actions help connect research initiatives across Europe and beyond, and enable researchers and innovators to grow their ideas in any science and technology field by sharing them with their peers. The normal duration of a cost action is usually 4 years. I think that BESTPRAC may be the only cost action that received an extension of additional 2 years. And as you all may know, cost actions do not fund research, but only network, meaning trips and stay for the different activities within the action. A few words about BESTPRAC. BESTPRAC is a network that was established since 2014 to allow networking and exchanging financial, legal, and administrative experience, to share and develop best practices, encouraging knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer, and increased efficiency in project management. And with the main aim to establish a network for the administrative, finance, and legal services in universities, research organizations, and related entities. In a nutshell, BESTPRAC has more than 600 research administrators from 41 countries. We have 3 working groups, Working Group 1 Administration, Working Group 2 Finance, and Working Group 3 Legal. Since 2014, we held 12 working group meetings in 10 inclusiveness countries. We had 7 management committee meetings, 8 training schools, 76 short-term scientific missions, and 250 peer-to-peer presentations, under which 15 of them were made by invited experts. In our social media networks, we have 201 members in LinkedIn, more than 300 followers on Twitter, and more than 200 followers on Facebook. Okay. Now about the grant holder. The grant holder is actually the legal entity which is responsible for the administrative and financial implementation of the cost action. So the grant holder is responsible to identify who will be the grant manager, who will act on behalf of the grant holder for all the tasks and responsibilities that the grant holder has. The responsibilities of a grant holder are divided into 2 main categories: the administrative responsibilities and the financial responsibilities. When we talk about the administrative responsibilities, these include the preparation of documentation for meetings under the guidance of the action chair and the vice chair. For example, the distribution of agendas, the issuing of invitations, drafting minutes, and ensuring that all eligible participants sign the relevant attendance list, which is really important. Another responsibility is the update of the ECOS platform. There we upload the meeting minutes, the signed attendance list, event agendas, etc. Coordination of action meetings, collecting and archiving supporting documents related to processing reimbursement claims and the associated payments. It's mandatory to keep these supporting documentations for a period of at least 5 years for audit purposes, and also for archiving all necessary management committee decisions relating to the action. Now, the financial responsibilities of a grant holder is to ensure that all payments that are linked to the cost action activities are paid in line with the management committee approvals and the eligibility criteria, which is stipulated in the present Vandemeco. All payments shall be made within 30 days after the participant's claim and no later than 45 calendar days after the end of the event. So the grant holder should firstly validate the claims, proceed with the payment, and at the final stage, record this payment in the ECOS platform. And the final responsibility of a grant holder is financial reporting. Usually is 2 financial reports, one in the interim period and the other one is a final financial report, which includes the reimbursement forms, the payment of eligible participants, and the attendance list. So what actually cost funds? Cost actually funds networking tools like meetings, which may be science management meetings, either working group meetings or scientific workshops and seminars, training schools, short-term scientific missions, and dissemination and publications. So here I'm going to try to give you an example of what is eligible for reimbursement for meetings. The first expense that is eligible for reimbursement is the travel between either home or work and the meeting by the most economical means. When we say by the most economical means, we mean, for example, if a participant travels by plane, then the participant must use economic class and not business class. Business class is not eligible for reimbursement. And also cost funds accommodation for a maximum number of the full days of the meeting attended, plus 1 extra day at a flat rate of 120 euros per night. And here the management committee can set a lower flat rate or lower the number of nights. And this is done usually before any invitation is sent to the participants. In the table below, I'm trying to give you an example of how we calculate the total and maximum amount that a participant is eligible for reimbursement for accommodation and meals. For example, if we have a meeting that the duration of the meeting is 2 days, then the participant can be reimbursed for a maximum of 3 days. So for the accommodation, the participant will be reimbursed for 3 days times 120 euros per night, which equals to 360 euros. And for meals, the maximum amount the participant can get is he or she can be reimbursed for maximum of 4 days, times 2, which is the meals per day, lunch and dinner, times 20 euros per meal, which equals to 160 euros. So the total amount that the participant can get is 520 euros. The next table, I'm trying to give you an example on how we calculate meals, the eligibility for lunch and dinner. For example, the first day of the meeting, if a participant departs for his home, for his country before 12 o'clock at noon, then the participant is eligible for lunch and dinner as well. And if the participant departs from his home or work before 7 o'clock in the afternoon, then he's eligible only for dinner. For the second day of the meeting, the participant is eligible for both lunch and dinner. And for the day after the meeting ends, which is the departure day, if a participant arrives at his home destination after 12 o'clock at noon, then the participant is eligible for lunch. And if the participant arrives to his or her home country after 7 o'clock in the afternoon, then the participant is eligible for both lunch and dinner. So other costs that are eligible for funding are the local transport expenses, which include the use of metro, local train, bus or ferry. We need no receipts for up to 25 euros. Local car travel expenses are also eligible for reimbursement. Car travel can be reimbursed at a rate of 0.35 euro per kilometer. This is limited to a maximum distance of 2,000 kilometers for the entire journey. And if a participant travels with multiple participants, then only one can claim the reimbursement for the car travel. What is not eligible for funding is taxi expenses, parking expenses, conference and registration fees, lecture fees and honoraria, accommodation, transportation, and other costs related to obtaining visas, life and medical insurance, luggage insurance, fees and charges if a participant needs to rebook travel tickets, additional accommodation, fuel expenses, or other expenses linked to car travel. Wi-Fi, telephone, internet, and minibar consumption expenses are not eligible for reimbursement. Printing and postage expenses, and finally, regional and national taxation fees and stamp duty expenses are not eligible for reimbursement. Moving on to the next slide, here are some of the challenges we face during the implementation of a cost action. Is the ineligible VAT cost. As you know, VAT is not eligible for reimbursement. This can be covered only via the 15% of the FSAC percentage that the grant holder organization gets from the total budget of the cost action. Bank charges, sometimes they may be more than predicted. Money sometimes is not enough. And another challenge that we face is that funding is returned if it's not used after the end of each granting period. For example, if for a granting period we have, let's say 100,000 and we only utilize 80,000, then the remaining 20,000 is not transferred to the next granting period, and it's actually lost.
Andri, we have 2 minutes and 2 questions.
This is my last slide.
Thanks.
So here are some tips for the successful implementation of the action. Dedicate 1 or 2 days per week for payments linked to cost action activities, for example, for the meetings. This depends on how many participants you have for each meeting. Always, but always advise cost van de Mecum to ensure that you follow the updated cost rules and regulations because they always change. If something is unclear or if you need further documentation, then contact directly the participants if needed. Maintain good relationship and ask for advice, guidelines from the administrative project officer in cost. And finally, attend Cost Academy workshops and trainings for grant holders, which are really very useful and helpful. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just 2 quick questions because we are the time for a plenary session just started. Do you have experience the administration of cost grant is very time consuming for the grant manager and administration employees of the grant holder institution?
I didn't understand the question. If it's time consuming to be the grant manager?
Yeah.
That's why I told you in my previous slides to allocate specific dates or specific time for the payments, regarding the payments and for the reimbursements of the, if you organize your calendar, then it's not so difficult to manage.
Great. Are there any special eligibility exception due to COVID?
Okay. As far as I know, because we have a similar case in our institute where we are a grant holder of a cost action. They cannot use the money for meetings, and you can, let's say, in communication with the administrative officer in cost, you can agree whether you can transfer the amount due to this special occasion of COVID.
Okay, thank you very much, Andri, for your excellent presentation and discussion. At the end of this plenary session, I wish to thank all my colleagues from WG2 to be very active and help us in presenting and prepare all this presentation today. Thank you, especially because remain engaged in the follow-up activity in the BESTPRAC network after project finished 2 years ago. Goodbye. We will staying in touch, and hopefully I will see you soon in Belgrade.
Hope to.
Thanks once again for all presentations and discussion.
Yeah, I hope
Thank
so,
you, Marija.
and thanks to everyone for participating.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very, very much from my side as well. I've just posted the link again on the chat for the plenary session, so see you all there. And thank you so much, Andri, Inge, and Marija. It was a pleasure with you as always. And yeah, let's enjoy the last sessions in the plenary. So have a good day, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.